very much, Cathaoirleach, and I welcome the Minister for the House. I think it's an historic event in that you've ad-libbed plus used your iPad, which I think is the first for this House, as opposed to reading from a script or indeed ad-libbing on its own. So you're very welcome here, and I'm glad you're here to listen to the points of the people of this House. It's regrettable, however, that your colleagues left their stations, Minister Howland and Minister Noonan, before listening to the entirety of the opposition lead spokespeople, which they did. Which is unfortunate, and I don't think it augurs well for the cognizance that government take of the points that may be made. But you're not going to do that because you're very kindly here today. Nevertheless, no, I'm pleased that the Taoiseach and Taoiseach were there, but the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure most certainly should have been there, and I think it was an insult in the extreme to the shadow spokespeople in that regard. Some of the things I want to welcome in this budget are the measures in relation to renovating homes, the measures in relation to greener homes, and those kinds of points that have been included to try and get people working, to try and encourage people to spend in doing necessary things with their homes, undertaking necessary works. That certainly will be of help, that certainly will create employment, and that is something that I would certainly welcome. There are many things in it, obviously, I don't welcome, and while I appreciate it's difficult to find consensus when people are cutting in any respect, it's hard to find any two people that would agree, and one wonders how any cabinet could manage to do it. That said, I have to speak in terms of my interpretation of it. Certainly, I'm baffled why we have to consistently ignore the people over 100,000. For the very few people I know in that income category, I think they were conditioned last year to take a hit of a few percent, and I think they were conditioned this year to take a hit of a few percent. And that, in my mind, would have easily cancelled out some of the more mean-spirited measures within this budget. Not just to score political points. I mean, the bereavement grant, I mentioned it at the order of business here on the fact that it was leaked through the paper. Indeed, most of the budget was leaked in the media today, which, Minister, you might pass back, is, again, somewhat disrespectful to the houses of the Oireachtas. I mean, I don't think there was a measure of surprise in today's speech from either minister. But anyway, to cut this grant, introduced in 1999 at some €630, when the cost of running the country was some 25 billion. And now to be cutting, okay, it's substantially more at 850, to cutting out completely when the cost of running the country is 52 million, with the average funeral cost in the country at 3,000 outside Dublin and 4,500 inside Dublin, I think is mean-spirited. It's kicking in 40 million. You know, what in real terms would that have been missed from the over 100,000 category, where I believe those people were conditioned? Yes, it would hurt them to pay an extra 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is percent over that income category. Of course it would hurt them, but the reality is they would be better healed to shoulder that additional burden than most other people. The phone allowance, again, you know, how much really is being saved here? I mean, we're talking about a minor enough amount considering the impact it would have on the lives of the elderly people. The changes in terms of eligibility to the medical card. I mean, consistently over the last number of weeks, members on all sides of this House have highlighted that, yes, while the greater number of people have medical cards, we are homing in on people, you know, in their 70s and 80s, you know, who have been getting forms in the post to say, fill this out, fill that out, and losing their medical cards, which is creating a very serious and difficult situation for them. Also, people suffering from chronic diseases, a scenario which Minister Riley said he was going to deal with when he came in, first of all, in terms of allowing legislating for the provision of medical cards. That legislation never transpired. Are we to think the same of the under-5s medical card, which needs to be legislated for? We're told that the chronic diseases couldn't be provided for in legislation because of difficulties. Are we to have the same with the under-5s? We've seen the GP's reaction to it, no engagement from them, which doesn't surprise me. Indeed, there's another aspect of the budget that was no engagement in terms of the assistance to those who were unemployed wanting to start up their own business, but I'll come back to that in a moment. I mean, one wonders, how is that going to be done? Again, it was mentioned in the other House. I mentioned it last year, indeed, about Minister Michael Noonan in opposition, saying, you know, what did Minister Brian Lennon have against a third child? I mean, what does this minister have against young mothers? was said in the other House. And that's critically important when we see additional taxation earlier in the year take effect and now an overall reduction. So certainly there seems to be an issue there. In terms of the discretional cards, just back to the medical cards issue for the moment, we still have no clinical panel in place. And the only panel I can see in place in terms of the interpretation of people on discretional cards is the bottom line: save money. So unless people meet the financial criteria, they're off the list. And I think, before perhaps we rush into, providing medical cards or providing, free GP care to the children of the Michael O'Learys of the country, maybe we should focus on the people who have chronic MS, who have cancer, or who have serious chronic diseases. What is this clinical panel doing? Are they in place? Who are they? How and what criteria are they operating to? Perhaps we should have looked at that. How much time have I here?
8 minutes. You have 3 minutes left.
3 minutes. 3 minutes left? Yeah, okay. When I looked through the various books that were handed to us when the speech was being read out, we see headline amounts of savings, which confused me. One in particular jumped out at me, where you've mentioned specifically additional expenditure to do with road maintenance and road repairs, shovel-ready projects, getting people back to work. But yet, if you look under the transport section of Minister Howland's speech, it says that the NRA and road surfacing was going to save 50 million this year. So how on one hand are we saving 50 million in terms of road surfacing, and on another we're going to have additional expenditure? We're all for more sports capital programmes, particularly in run into election. There'll be a big hooray from all the councillors throughout the country on that one. Yes, the Benner Energy Programme is also something to be welcomed. But if we wanted to give people respite directly into their homes, how could we get to every single home in the country? And the reality is we've done nothing to do, say, with the price of petrol, where the cost per litre is in and around 69 cents or something like that, and the government add-on on top of that is 130% of that cost. And if you took the average family doing 12,000 a year, let's say average 30 miles per gallon, how much is that? It's €240 per month. If we wanted to give something back directly to each family in the home, why could we not have looked at something like that? Instead, we've come up with, ridiculous job activation members, where we're telling the unemployed, if you were a long-term unemployed person, and if by some fluke of reality that you manage to set up a business that manages to make money in the first 2 years, we'll give you that money tax-free. If anybody in this chamber knows anything about business, and I know a little, I can tell you, you may as well tell the National Lottery to announce that the first person in with both parents over 105 years can have the winning lottery numbers. Because I predict confidently, nobody will qualify for that scheme. Nobody. And whatever civil servant who only knows the inside of a government department knows nothing about business, and it is window dressing in the extreme that they will do nothing for anybody. Can I say that in terms of young people and the cuts to social welfare here, I mean, what are we really want to do to get people out there? We're making it more difficult for them to get into internships. If they've been out of third level education for a year, haven't done a level 5 already, we won't let them back in again. So, I mean, I think all of these measures are designed in some way to look less harsh, but in reality won't apply to anybody in practice. And that's my difficulty with this. In terms of getting enterprise going again, I'd love to see an ICI type financial institution. Give them 300 million, pick 20 good underwriters and get them out there. Encourage people to borrow money, set up business, and fail 3 times but succeed once. That's what we need. Not some harebrained, design a scheme that no one can apply for, because that's what that 40 grand a year tax-free situation is. So, look, while I appreciate the ministers have done their best in a very difficult environment, and on the basis that I admit we would all have a different approach and a different set of cuts that we would make, I do believe there are a number of these measures that are very superficial. There are a number that are far too harsh, needlessly, and yet we continue to ignore the people who are best healed to take a bigger hit, over 100,000 a year, and no, they would not flood out of the country. They would not flood out of the country, in my view, specifically as well if they were told, you know what, I need an extra 4 to 6% for you for 5 years to help look after the relative security and health of our least well off, of our elderly, of our infirmed. And I think the people would respond. In fact, I believe they were conditioned to respond to it in last year's budget as with this one. And I only hope that we could do that throughout the legislation that's to come to back up these budgetary measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator